All right, welcome to day 2 of the Northeastern Bringing the Farm to School Regional Facilitator Workshop. Thank you again for sharing these next 3 days with us. We hope you enjoy the day yesterday and hope you're looking forward to diving deeper into the trainer's toolkit over the next 3 days. As we start off day 2 together, we want to remind and encourage folks to turn on cameras as you're able to, and while we ask that you stay muted, if you're not speaking, please feel free to come off mute and ask questions and share at any time. So before we get started in the day, just like to see how everyone's feeling around the upcoming materials. So if you're able to, just share in the chat or come off mute any kind of interested sort of topics that you're hoping to learn today. So if there's anything you're hoping to discuss further with your team or with us as a group, feel free to share those thoughts right now through the chat or come off mute. And for those of you who just joined, just asking for any kind of ideas of what folks are most excited about learning today. All right, then not hearing or seeing anything, so we can just move on. So before we get started today, this is just a reminder that your participant home base, which was shared in the chat just a moment ago, has all of the documents and links that you'll need to follow along with us, such as links to the Jamboard, our website, digital versions of the trainer's toolkit, as well as the entire workshop agenda for the week. So if you have any trouble finding anything, feel free to let us know. We can help you get back on track. Today, we'll be focused on doing a deep dive into the producer curriculum, specifically the introduction, modules 1 and 2, and of course, spending some time with your state breakout teams for the day. Throughout the day, you'll have, in those breakout sessions, some time to really think about how you'll be using the curriculum and how you'll be sort of approaching your local producer trainings. We'd like to remind you that the implementation of the trainings may look different from state to state or training to training. And as we've talked about yesterday, you may form a team to plan a standalone training, or you may pull pieces of the Bringing the Farm to School training to enhance other producer events. So we'll highlight and uplift different ways that the curriculum is flexible and can be adapted to different formats. Before we review each module, I'd like to just orient you in how we'll be approaching the module overview for the day. For each producer curriculum module, we'll be walking through the content section by section, in some cases slide by slide, to familiarize you all with the content and the modules within it, and then help you sort of envision and plan for presenting the curriculum material yourself. We encourage you to follow along in both the facilitator's guide and your producer workbook, and we'll give you page references throughout just to help you follow along, just like the example that you see on the screen right there. So as we move through the modules, we'll point out activities and opportunities for local customization, facilitator tips for you to think about when you're presenting to producers as well. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Lacey to get us started with the producer curriculum overview.
Thanks, Tomas, and good morning, everybody, or afternoon. It's great to see you all again, and so glad you could come back for day 2. This is Lacey Stevens with the National Farm to School Network, and I'm going to get us started by orienting you to an important tool that will hopefully be key to helping you understand this full picture of the curriculum and the content, and help you plan and organize your content as you move forward with a potential local producer training. We know that we're sharing a lot with you, and there's a lot to this curriculum, but this tool will really help you kind of organize that and orient in your mind how all the pieces fit together. And so we're going to start by talking about the training module outlines, or the curriculum maps, as we call them in some places. So these curriculum maps are going to start on page 11 of your facilitator guide. So facilitator guide, we're going to our orange resource, or yellow. And on page 11 is where we're going to start talking about these training module outlines or curriculum maps. So the purpose of these training module outlines is to provide an easy to use reference and snapshot of all of the module content that we brought together in one place. So as you get to know the curriculum over the next few days, and as you start to think about and kind of go back and look at the different curriculum sections and pieces, you can use these outlines to kind of see how they all fit together and navigate between the different sections. And you can see how the different components, such as the case studies or the worksheets or the pieces within the producer workbook, fit within this big picture of the curriculum outline. This is also a great tool as you start to think about your training and what elements you want to bring, what's content you want to highlight in your trainings to help you plan that as well. So you can see all these modules and identify which module sections and specific activities, maybe based on those key learnings or objectives that you want to be sure to highlight and are going to be most helpful and relevant to your audience. So again, we're going to start on page 11. In our facilitator guide is where you'll start to find those training module outlines. The producer's workbook has a slightly different version, and Tammy showed us this yesterday when she familiarized us with the producer workbook. But again, that producer version, as you can see kind of the comparison here between the facilitator's version and the producer version, just has what producers are really going to want to know. And you can see here that the producer versions are embedded within each module within the producer workbook. So let's take a closer look at the components of the training modules. Here you see the training module outline for module 1, which is in your facilitator guide on page 12. So the different components, these are the different components that you'll see in all of the training module outlines. We first have the training topic and the duration to help you kind of get an idea about timing and flow of the overview of topics and time these sections might take. We have the learning objectives for each section. So again, this can help you prioritize different sections based on the learning needs and interests of your audience. We have the content and core concepts. So that's high level, the outline of the content that you'll find within each of those module sections. And then we have the training activities and materials outlined. So that's where all of the producer worksheets are listed, all of the relevant materials, including the case studies and videos, reading case studies, podcasts that might be relevant to that section. So you can kind of pick and choose the samples of case studies and different activities that are going to be most relevant and helpful when you present or share this with producers. So this is the producer version of that curriculum map, again, that's found at the beginning of module 1 in the producer workbook. And you see here, we've just included the components that are going to help the producers navigate that module. So the learning objectives, what they're going to come away with at the end of this section. The overview of the module on that left-hand side, so they can help orient to the different pieces of content. And then, of course, importantly for producers, the worksheets that are relevant to those pieces and the case studies. So if they want to dive in deeper to a particular section and hear from producers who have experience in that particular area, they can reference back to some of those case studies and resources. And it's right there in their producer workbook for them to reference. So over the next 2 days, we'll be going through each of these modules in depth, but just to help orient you to the flow, we'll walk through each of these training modules just very briefly so you can kind of see the flow and what's included within each content section. So in just a few moments, Tammy is going to jump in and walk us through the introduction. You see there's one primary section in this introduction focused on orienting us to the power of farm to school. And then I will jump in to module 1, and module 1 is all about getting to know school markets. So we'll talk about child nutrition programs, we'll talk about local food sourcing and procurement, and then we'll share some of the optional content that comes with module 1 around CACFP and summer food service. Later this afternoon, we'll be hearing from Robert about module 2, which is all about focusing on selling to schools. And there, Robert will talk to us about farm to school market channels, as well as selling to school districts. Tomorrow morning, we'll be hearing from Margot about module 3, which is choosing the right product to sell to schools. And Margot will be discussing choosing that right product and product development. Finally, tomorrow afternoon, we'll hear about module 4, which is growing for schools. And we'll hear about business planning, scaling production, crop planning, livestock production components, as well as navigating food safety for producers. And we'll finally wrap up the day with our brief conclusion that really brings all of the pieces together. So again, we highly recommend that you continue to reference these training outlines, as they're really helpful tools to keep you oriented during today, and also to come back to as you move forward with your teams and thinking about what you want to take back and incorporate into your future work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy to start us into the introduction.
Thanks so much, Lacey, for that overview of the curriculum and how to use those maps or those outlines to just help orient you to all the resources available to you at a quick glance. So, are we ready to jump into the curriculum? Thumbs up. So we're going to be spending the next 30 minutes or so walking through the content found in the introduction module in both the facilitator guide and the producer workbook. So we will be going back and forth between the facilitator guide and producer workbook and following along with the slides that are visible as thumbnails in the facilitator guide, which is also accessible online. And as Tomas mentioned earlier, I'll be referencing where we are in each resource by including visual clues or cues, like the slide image shown here. Actually, the previous slide, Lacey. As well as you can see the slide image shown here, as well as page numbers and references. So you see the page number here for the facilitator guide on page 19 is where you can see where the slide decks start for the introduction. So if at any point you cannot find where we are or need something repeated, just feel free to drop your question or comment into the chat and we'll get you where you need to be, because we're going to be going back and forth quite a bit. So this image in the top right corner is the first slide of the introduction slide deck. And you will see the matching thumbnail of this slide on page 19 of the facilitator guide. So next slide. Okay, so let's make sure we're all in the same place. If you go to the facilitator guide on page 18 and the producer workbook on page 2, that'll get you where you need to be. And we encourage that you all have each resource open and follow along with both of these side by side. And that will give you the best sense of how the training flows and how these resources work together. And if you do not have the hard copies, please visit the website to access digital versions. And hopefully Tomas will just put that into the chat so you can navigate there. I know a few of you are still waiting on your packets. So in the facilitator guide, each module includes an about section, followed by a module curriculum outline, as well as background information, including core concepts, digging deeper resources, the case studies that will appear in that particular module, and key terms relevant to that module. So this information is intended to be a snapshot of what you'll find in the module for planning purposes, basically. And in the producer workbook, producers will see an even more streamlined version of that outline that Lacey just went over. And basically, it's just the curriculum outline followed by content. So let's take a closer look at that curriculum outline. So if you turn to page 18 of the facilitator guide, and there's a modified, simpler version on page 2 of the producer workbook, you can see for the introduction, content, and core concepts, they're all focused on introducing farm to school to producers and setting the stage for understanding both the demand for local food in school meals, as well as the benefits for producers in selling to schools. A big part of the introduction is providing an opportunity for seasoned producers to share their success stories with farm to school, building in those peer learning opportunities that we've been referring to so far. So we'll talk about this more later, But this is where customization of the module comes in. So for example, finding local producers in your state doing this work to share their stories and provide a localized context. This module also introduces the concept of how producers can use goal setting and action planning to support their efforts in selling to schools. And materials needed to include those farm to school success stories with local producers and school business action planning. So the materials needed are, you can see in that far right corner there, are those school success stories, as well as the school business action planning guide, which is on page 52 of the producer workbook. Don't worry about turning there now. We'll get there soon enough. So we estimate that this is going to take about 30 to 45 minutes to go through the introduction. And the length of time you will spend will mostly depend on how many local producer success stories and in which way you're going to feature those success stories. And then also how much time you want to familiarize producers with that school business action planning guide. So under the curriculum outline on page 18 of the facilitator guide, so turn to page 18 and I'll be going along with you here. You'll see the background information for the module listed. And so those core concepts are listed first. And if you need a refresher for any of the core concepts for any module, check out the Digging Deeper section into the core concepts that's listed just below that outline there. And, you know, Digging Deeper is basically just a short list of resources to support you in preparing for delivering this content. So could folks give a thumbs up if you're seeing those Digging Deeper resources? I think I'm seeing some thumbs up here. Okay, I am seeing a few thumbs up. All right, cool. Great. All right. So I want to point out though, with those Digging Deeper core concepts, you can, if it might be best to just pop online and view the facilitator guide digitally, so you can click on the hyperlink that's embedded in Appendix A of the facilitator guide. And Appendix A has the facilitator tools, including those Digging Deeper resources as well. So let's turn to the Appendix A of the facilitator guide on page 108, just to look at that a little bit and see what some of those Digging Deeper concepts are. And you can see the introduction is kind of right in the middle of that page. Does everyone see that? Hopefully everybody sees that at this point. Okay, give you some time to find that. So those all, you can see there's a few Digging Deeper resources about the benefits of farm to school under the introduction, how farm to school works, and this whole farm planning guide, which we're going to talk about in a sec here, and a guide to farm to school community action planning. So those are some resources that will help you prepare for the introduction. So let's flip back to page 18 through 19 of the facilitator guide. And I want you to look at that, the background section, you'll also find a link to, you can see here on your screen there, and it's also corresponding on page 19 of the facilitator guide. You'll see a link to download the slide deck for this particular module. And that's the same for all of the modules. And one thing I want to point out is that this is actually an editable file that's available for you to adapt as needed. And for the introduction, as I mentioned, it's on page 19. And as a reminder, those slide deck files are also individually accessible on the facilitators page of the website. And Tomas will put that into the chat for you to look at. So another thing I want to point out here on page 19 is a list of case studies that will appear in this particular module. And for the introduction, we have included a podcast conversation between a school buyer from the Natomas School District in California and a small 2-acre producer that sells to them called Fiery Ginger Farm. And they share their perspectives on the importance of building and maintaining relationships when it comes to farm to school. And again, those case studies can be accessed on the Bringing the Farm to School case studies page. And those are, that particular case study is also included there as a podcast. So you'll also notice each slide in the facilitator guide has talking points for you. And I went over this briefly yesterday. As we go through these modules today and tomorrow, we'll be pulling from these talking points and summarizing where necessary. We will not be reading these talking points verbatim and really encourage you folks to read through each module's talking points before delivering your training. And as a reminder, you can make necessary adjustments to the slides and talking points, as well as add your own regionalization and customization. In fact, we encourage that. And these talking points have been translated into producer-friendly language in the producer workbook. So you will also see another thing I wanted to point out here is the facilitator prompts, and they're really intended to provide that additional context and instructions for the activities that you'll be conducting in your trainings. So last thing I want to point out here is the key terms for the module, and they're listed in this background section as well. And you'll notice as we get into modules 1 through 4, there's actually an optional Jeopardy game option for you to support producers as they learn these new terms. And Lacey and Robert will be talking more about this Jeopardy game, and we'll be doing a sample, and you'll get an opportunity for your team to gain points. So yeah, get your thinking caps on and make sure you're reviewing those glossary of terms. So a full list of key terms and acronyms from this module are also available on page, you can just reference them on page 105 in that glossary of terms. And it's also located, they directly correspond with the glossary of terms on page 62 of the producer workbook. So if you want to look, take a moment to turn to page 105, and let's look at a few of those key terms for the introduction. So let's pause and take a moment for you to turn to page 105. All right. So can someone find the definition of whole farm goal setting in the facilitator guide glossary and come off mute to share your definition?
I can read it.
All right.
All right. So I got distinct from other farm planning approaches because it ties together all the planning producers do for the whole farm. This holistic approach is based on the short and long-term vision producers and their families have for themselves and the farm.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. And what state are you from?
Massachusetts.
All right. You just earned another point for Massachusetts. Oh, Maine has the most points right now. So you just earned a point for Massachusetts. All right. All right. So can someone find the definition of school markets in the producer workbook glossary and come off mute and read it for all of us? Again, it's on page 62 of the producer workbook.
Hi, it's Renee. I can do that for you.
Sweet.
So school markets are the market pathway in which child nutrition programs are the end consumer.
Okay, thank you. All right, Renee, you earned a point for Maine. Okay, great. So that kind of just gets you familiar with those glossaries and how you can help producers. You know, we're trying to create a shared language here because our there is definitely a disconnect in the procurement language and the language that producers use when they're accessing school markets. All right. So let's go to the next slide. So let's turn back to page 19 of the facilitator guide, and I'll turn back there with you. This is the very first slide in the introduction after the title slide, and it's intended to contextualize the individual local producer training that you'll be hosting in your state within the broader training program objectives. So in other words, we want to answer the question, why am I here for producers? So as you can see on your screen, the objectives for the training at the entire program are to increase producers' knowledge and understanding of farm to school, to increase their participation in farm to school activities, and to increase the amount of local foods that they sell to schools. There will be more specific learning objectives embedded in each module, which we've already seen in the curriculum outlines, and we'll look more closely in a moment for the introduction. But, you know, again, in the introduction, you're just setting the stage and context for producers. So moving on to slides 3 through 4. We will hear much more about how to conduct evaluations for your trainings on Thursday of this week from our evaluators at NYU. Lydia Oberholzer will be presenting on that on Thursday. But I did want to point out, though, that when you are hosting your training and using the introduction slide deck, that slides 3 and 4, they're shown here on the left of your screen, will prompt you to initiate that pre-training survey process for producers at that time before getting into any content, because we just really want to understand where producers are starting out. Similarly, you will be prompted to do the post-training survey during the conclusion of the modules, which we'll get to tomorrow. You do have access to additional guidance about the evaluation protocol in Appendix D, which is also shown on the right of your screen, and you can check it out on page 131. And you'll have an updated evaluation protocol for virtual trainings, because unfortunately that's the world we're living in right now, in your workshop materials folder, in that green pocket folder you all received in the FedEx. So if you have any questions about evaluations at this point, just please make a note of them and save them for the session with NYU on Thursday. So following along in the facilitator guide on page 20, you'll see a list of the learning objectives for this particular module, the introduction. So now we're starting to move into the introduction of the content. And the introduction aims to support producers in gaining an understanding of what farm to school is, how it can benefit them, and start to have them identify their motivations for selling to schools, and to consider how their overall farm goals align with those motivations and values. And then finally, to introduce the concept of action planning and goal setting as a tool for meeting their own farm and lifestyle goals through selling to schools. And so these are captured on slide 5 of this module. And they're also listed in the simplified curriculum outline for producers in their workbook on page 2. So the first activity you'll be doing with producers is an icebreaker. And before I explain this activity, I want folks to take a moment to think of icebreakers you have used in your trainings, especially with producers that you all like to use. So we'll be sharing those shortly. But as you can see outlined in the facilitator prompt pulled from the facilitator guide, we recommend that you provide producers with an index card to write down their icebreaker answers, giving them time to think about their answers on their own first. Depending on the size of the group, you may be able to have the whole group share some of their answers or break into smaller groups. There's a lot of different ways this could look, but we want to make sure producers are connecting with each other early on in the training and beginning to articulate their why. Why are they here? Why farm to school? So we recommend collecting those index cards at the end of this activity and then taking some time to review them when you have a moment earlier on into the training. So you can make sure that you're able to weave in the answers to their questions throughout, and to also make sure you're meeting their expectations and goals as best you can. So at this point, if you have any go-to icebreakers that you like to use during trainings, especially with producers, please come off mute or share and add to the chat. We'd love to hear about them. So Christy, who is apparently trained by Heifer International in a participatory training, uses a sticky wall, which is an icebreaker in itself. Yeah, sticky walls are great. Thanks, Christy. Anybody else willing to share a good icebreaker that they use with their producers? Christy, maybe you could just take a few seconds to come off mute and talk about how that sticky wall works as an icebreaker.
Sure. So the sticky wall is actually a piece of non-rip or ripstop nylon, which is like sprayed with a adhesive, wax adhesive that they used to use in the old days before graphic designers to like move things around on a print. It's like a spray can that you can buy. And what we used to do is like, so when we'd have these questions, we'd give everybody an index card and ask them to write the answer in the index card and then literally like stick it to the piece of nylon that was taped to the wall. And it was like a little bit of magic and everybody was always like, how does that work? And so it was always like a fun little icebreaker in itself because it was, you know, this like magical piece of fabric that things stuck to.
Great, and then everybody could see each other's, whatever you're outlining in that postcard, but it was like a shared resource as well. That's awesome. Renee has an idea that she uses in prompting any kind of prompt question that reinforces the food connection to the land or region is nice. So maybe even something like, how long has your farm or boat or family been in operation? So yeah, just really getting to know the farmers. Right, great. Thanks, Renee. All right, moving on. Okay, so the first content area starts on slide 7 of the facilitator guide and on page 3 of the producer workbook. So what is farm to school? So slides 8 through 10 in the facilitator guide and page 3 of the producer workbook really begins to define what the core elements of farm to school are, including procurement of local food, education, and school gardens. We want producers to have a general sense about these 3 aspects of farm to school, where they can potentially plug in outside of local procurement if they're interested and able, as well as emphasize that the benefits of farm to school that will learn, that you all will be teaching and they will be learning more about are really amplified when these 3 elements are working together and reinforcing those impacts. So as described in the talking points at the top of page 21 of the facilitator guide, We want farmers to know that farm to school is unique in every community and that the training you plan has been designed and customized with their specific needs and offerings or their specific products in mind. And so slide 9, we want producers to start thinking about how their own goals may align with selling to schools and see that school districts are interested in purchasing and serving local food and school meals for a variety of reasons, including supporting local farmers, businesses, and economies, increasing school meal quality and overall school meal program participation, increasing kids' willingness to try new fruits and vegetables, as well as supporting school wellness policies and broader school board priorities. So those are some of the motivations from the school district side, which can help producers identify their own motivations for selling to schools and see schools as partners. And then lastly, slide 10 illustrates the ways in which schools may partner with local farms and food businesses and gives producers a sense of the variety of ways they can engage with schools and the interconnected benefits. So for example, participating in a special school event or hosting a taste testing that can result in increase in sales from school districts or other families within the community. So a list of examples are listed under the talking points for slide 10 on page 21. So we're going to do a poll right now. Beyond procurement, what are the 3 most common partnerships between schools and farmers you'd highlight in your state? So Carlos will launch that poll, and for any partnerships you don't see listed, just feel free to put that in the chat. Okay, we're starting to see some answers come in. All right. So we're seeing cafeteria promotion campaigns, like tasting activities, are rising to the top here, as well as local producer highlights on school menus. Farm tours is another one that a lot of folks and let's see if in the chat there's any other here. Not seeing any others. So this looks like cafeteria promotion and farm tours, as well as local producer highlights on school menus. So great. Thanks, folks. Okay, so the next section of the introduction is meant to provide an overview of the benefits of farm to school for producers, and also be an opportunity for producers you are training to hear from other producers experienced in farm to school. So this section includes a couple of different regionalization opportunities. So slides 12 and 13 and the producer workbook at the bottom of page 3 includes a little bit of information about the financial impact and benefit of farm to school for producers, such as an increase in income from the farm to school sales, establishment of longer term revenue streams for individual producers, as well as an increase in market diversification and overall economic growth. So we want producers to know that selling to schools and participating in farm to school program may benefit profitably, either directly through increased sales to schools or indirectly through diversified marketing strategies. For example, if marketing goes beyond just selling to schools, it can also occur to sell, to market to students and families in the cafeteria and at school events. Farmers can also advertise their work with schools at farmers markets or other market outlets. So lots of different ways to get the word out there. So this section also includes a snapshot of ways that Farm to School may align with their farm goals, such as nourishing kids with local fresh produce, promoting agriculture as a career pathway for youth, and also increasing the visibility of smaller farms in their communities. And I also want to point out that, as Carolyn was mentioning yesterday, a farmer might come to this point and say, well, maybe I'm not seeing the benefits and this isn't right for me. And so that's just as important as farmers finding some of those ways that they can benefit profitably or through their goals. It might just not work out as well with some farmers. So that's equally as important. So this is also an opportunity to highlight economic impact data on producers selling to schools and farm to school participation data in your state, if you have it. And Lacey's going to be talking about how you can highlight that in module 1. So this is where contextualizing the benefits for producers in their locale or similar locations can be really helpful. So we have time built into our state breakout groups this week, and especially today, to brainstorm on how you can localize and customize your training to be relevant to your producer audience that you're working with. So as stated in the facilitator prompt on page 22 of the facilitator guide, slides 14 through 16 are really intended to be just a holding spot for the producers you're training, to hear from a producer about their experience in launching or expanding farm to school sales. This may take the form of a small share out and discussion with a farm to school farmer champion in your state, or a former or current USDA farm to school grantee. A video, another option is sharing a video of a producer sharing their farm to school story. The quotes on slides 14 through 16 are actual quotes from real farmers, but they're ultimately meant to be placeholders. In addition to planning a farm to school panel or a site visit, we encourage each state training team to generate a list of producers in your state that may be willing to pop in and share their story with other producers in an informal setting, such as a discussion or Q&A, or you may have considered doing some kind of pre-recorded content. Again, we have dedicated breakout time to do just that together this week. So any ideas coming to mind, jot them in that trainer action plan in your green folder, and you can discuss them later with your group. So want to just pause and see if there's any questions at this point about what we've talked about. Okay, so we've got some stuff in the chat about the state Harvest of the Month programs. Those are a really great way to, that was probably related to those partnerships that we were talking about earlier. And then Jameson had a question about, can you help explain the 5% average increase in income? Where does that data come from? And do the case studies mentioned show that increase? Oh, and I see that Lacey did answer Jameson's question. And so we do feature several case studies that talk about how farmers have increased their income or have used school sales to diversify their marketing strategy and provide a stable income for crops that work out within that marketing strategy. And we'll be talking about that over the next couple of days and featuring some of those producers, Jameson. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Okay, thanks. Great to hear the chatter. Okay, and thanks, Lacey, for helping me out with answering that question. Okay, so this next section introduces the School Business Action Planning Guide resource that producers will be using throughout their training. Goal setting or action planning really helps producers assess how their lifestyles, the farm landscape, and their mission can frame their selection in a marketing channel. So producers will review their goals and how these relate to school sales. The type of goal setting is referred to as whole farm goal setting, but the concept does not need to be further covered for the purposes of this training. But if you are interested in learning more about how whole farm goal setting can help producers in assessing whether or not school sales are right for them and to prep for your training, there's more resources in that digging deeper section, and I pointed that out. And there's a whole farm planning guide that can be linked from the online version of the Facilitator guide on page 18. So know there's extra info, and a lot of folks within the extension programming are familiar with whole farm goal setting. So that might be another reason to get somebody from extension onto your state team. Okay, so page 4 of the producer workbook aligns with slide 18 in the slide decks and in your facilitator guide. And it begins to walk producers through thinking about how their goals, both on and off of the farm, may align with selling to schools. The diagram shown in both the producer workbook and the facilitator guide illustrates the interconnected variables that shape a producer's farm goals as they relate to school sales, including lifestyle goals, the community assets, and marketing and profitability of their farm business and their production capabilities. So at the end of the introduction, producers will spend some time reflecting on these variables and which of them may relate to their goals and motivations for selling to schools. We encourage trainers to start this conversation at this point by asking producers if they have some sort of business plan in place and get them thinking about it from that perspective and how these variables may impact their decision to sell to schools. So next, you'll be guiding producers through the school business assessment. So the assessment is introduced to producers on page 4 to 5 of their workbook. And you'll see on page 5 of the workbook, this sample assessment that's been filled out. And the assessment is part of the school business action planning guide, which we'll look at more closely in a moment. Similar to the trainer action plan assessment checklist that you folks are using as trainers, this school business assessment will help producers identify areas that will be important to think about and plan for as they move through your training. So where are they starting when they come to the training? The assessment will be used to identify gaps in their skills as well as resources they need to think about before selling to schools. So Lacey is going to stop sharing and I am going to hopefully share. I was having issues yesterday, but I think I've got this in place now. So hopefully you all see the school business assessment here. Okay. All right. So as you can see in the school business assessment, we're really wanting producers to think about the module topics. They're categorized by the module topics in the producer training and the curriculum. So that includes goals, how the goals align with their school sales, the child nutrition programs, selling to schools, product identification, and growing for schools, which includes a production and business planning component. And I'm going to attempt to fill out this assessment. And as you can see here, the scoring is on a scale of 1 to 5, and 1 being little to no experience or resources in the area, and 5 being having strong skills and resources. And as you can see here, this farmer is feeling confident in their abilities to grow for schools, and that their goals are really aligned for school selling to schools. But they do need some help in understanding the school food purchasing practices. You can see here this big gap, as well as understanding how to connect with school buyers. So they're actually the perfect candidate for, and you can just kind of this producer would fill it in here, and I'm doing a terrible job at filling this in. But you can see this really gives a visual representation of where the producer needs to focus their energy and attention and resources as they're moving forward with selling to schools. So I'm going to stop my share and we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So once you've talked about this sample assessment with producers, you'll prompt them to take 5 to 8 minutes to turn to page 53 of their workbook and fill out this assessment. And once they've filled out this assessment, they're really ready to start thinking about their action plan and how to get the most out of the trainings. All right, so this last section of the introduction, producers are going to be, we want the producers to leave the training with a school business action plan for selling to schools. And the plan will provide producers with tangible next steps for selling to schools that reflect farm goal-based decision-making. And as I've already noted, that school business action planning guide is located in Appendix A of the producer workbook, so we can spend some time going to page 52. And you'll see throughout the curriculum that we built in time at the conclusion of each module for producers to fill in their school business action plan in real time. And they will be doing this module by module throughout the training. And it may be useful to actually provide action plan samples to demonstrate the variability among producers related to products, scale, and also farm to school experience. And it also might be useful to just print that action plan off, as I had mentioned yesterday. So the action planning guide starts on page 52. As we had mentioned that it starts with that assessment that we just filled out. So that's where we're starting the action plan. So after that, you'll see on page 54, a checklist assessing what benefits of farm to school interest producers and what support they need to achieve their farm to school related goals. So this checklist aligns with the content on slide 21 of the facilitator guide and in the slide deck. And at this point, you'll be introducing the idea of action planning and that SMART goals to producers and setting them up to develop that action plan around some SMART goal type of procedures. And then also help them think through those motivations to participate in farm to school, those short-term and long-term goals for farm to school sales and the value they can provide schools. And then finally, those action steps for the next 6 to 12 months, as well as resources, the contact info, and all that they need to implement their plan. So as you can see, it really closely models the trainer action plan. So at this point, you will prompt producers to, take about 10 minutes to fill out this questionnaire on page 54. And this is really a culmination of the thinking they've been doing in the whole introduction about the benefits and their motivations and goals. So to recap, at the end of the introduction, producers will have filled out both that school business assessment that I tried to do myself online, and then the benefits of farm to school checklist, shown here on page 54. So ideally, producers can then move forward with this information and their identified strengths, gaps, and benefits and goals to help them really navigate the training and identify those strategies and goals related to selling to schools. So for additional support preparing for this topic, you can visit that digging deeper into core concepts on page 18 of the Facilitator Guide. And we also have a recorded training that my colleague Jenny Lee and I did that is available on the Bringing the Farm to School website, but also Tomas or Lacey will put the YouTube link to that training. So this is where the introduction content ends in the Facilitator Guide. But before we move on to the questions in Module 1, I want to provide just a sneak peek about the rest of the action plan, just so you can see how it can be used throughout all of the modules. So we've already looked at the first 3 pages of the action planning guide, including that school business assessment on pages 52 and 3 of the producer workbook, and then the benefits of farm to school checklist on page 54. And so on page 55 of the producer workbook, you'll see a list of those into module check-ins where you'll guide producers to come back to that action plan at the end of each module to complete a quick check-in around the module objectives. And as our team members at the National Farm to School Network and NCAT go through the rest of the modules today and tomorrow, you'll continue to see those end of module check-in prompts and how you can, as a trainer, prompt producers to revisit that action plan at the end of the module. So those check-ins are really intended to be a jumping off point so that producers can then add those short-term strategies, immediate next steps, and to a timeline for each module and content area in the actual action plan table. And that starts on page 56. A summary table for the action plan is on page 61, and we'll revisit this together during the conclusion tomorrow. And so with that, I'll take questions and comments or I know I just threw a lot at you. Yes, Alexis.
Oh, sorry. I'm concerned about all of the information in the introduction. Can it really fit in 30 to 45 minutes with the evaluation and the icebreakers and then the action or the planning, that business assessment?
Yeah, it might be again, depending on how much time you're spending on those, the producer spotlight stuff, it might be closer to 45 minutes, but yeah, I think explaining it takes almost more time than actually going through those resources. So, but yeah, we've tried to go through that, and that's about how much time it's taken. But that's with not spending as much time on that producer spotlight piece. So, but yeah, it's a really good point, Alexis. And I think it's for all of you as trainers to really just pick and choose what works best. And as I was going through the introduction, I was thinking a lot of the folks that we're working with in these state teams are doing almost like an introduction as part of producer workshop, existing producer workshops. And I think this particular piece is a really great place to do that in those producer workshop collaborations. And then kind of setting producers up for following up with those nitty gritty details that we'll be covering in modules 1 through 4 and then finally wrapping up in that conclusion. So I really think this is a great way to, I know a lot of state teams have just been getting started by introducing producers to the content. And this is a really great tool to do that. So just some ideas on how to use a curriculum there.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or comments before we move on?
Just wondering, in cases
Jameson.
where,
Hi.
in cases where like people don't have a business plan, let's say, which is probably more farmers than there should be. What happens at that point for them? Do they, do traditionally people start shifting and going towards, okay, like let's help you build a business plan and integrate this into your system, or kind of what's the retention after this introduction? You know, how many people fall through and come back?
Yeah, a lot of the producers that we feature in those case studies say that is, I mean, not necessarily like that business plan piece, but really having a command of how much it costs to produce their products. That's a really important prerequisite for selling to schools, because they have schools will have a price point that they're working with, and producers have to come to that table and that discussion knowing how much they need to get for a specific product. So at the very least, having an understanding of those key financial documents that we'll be talking about in module 4, and having a command of their records and understanding those pieces is a pretty important prerequisite. So I know that some folks are working with beginning farmers, and it's not really a great suggestion to have beginning farmers start with school sales unless they're in those really small districts and doing some of those really introductory programming, like the Harvest of the Month program, for example, or selling just a few products to a salad bar or something like that. We've known some farmers that have been successful with doing that without having a really strong business plan. So I hope that helps. Great questions. Thank you. Okay, we're going to do a quick bio break.
We are going to jump into module 1, getting to know school markets. Hi again, this is Lacey with National Farm to School Network. And as we jump into module 1, getting to know school markets, we are again coming back to focus on what producers need to know about school food programs. So one thing I just want to reiterate and emphasize as we jump into this module is the ability and suggestion for you all as you go forward to identify where this can be customized to producer needs. Really think about what is most relevant within this content based on what you know about the producers that you work with and the producers that you might be reaching with this training and materials. We know again that there's a lot here, but you have full opportunity and control to be able to edit and customize the content and the resources that best fit the producers that you're working with. So just want to make sure that you're holding that as you are learning about what we have to offer here. So thinking about what we want producers to know, we really want to focus on helping producers understand school buyers enough for them to be able to market to and negotiate with those school buyers, and also understand the school buyer needs and perspectives, and start to think about how producers can meet those needs as they're talking and starting to have those conversations with potential school buyers. We, again, want to make sure that we're providing a really realistic view of farm to school sales. And as Tammy talked about, we know this won't be the right fit for every producer. So we want to balance providing a really realistic view, but also dispelling some of the myths and addressing some of the barriers that producers might run into through this process. Another final thing, just based on the conversation we had, I want to make a note that we do offer a lot of optional activities throughout Module 1. And so certainly if you wanted to do all of these different activities, it might take a little bit longer than we would estimate. But we do encourage you to kind of pick and choose the different activities that are going to work best for your group size and for your audience. So just keep that in mind as well, that these are a lot of optional activities to incorporate in the way that you see fits best. So let's get oriented back into our resources. So our Module 1 sections are going to start in our Facilitator guide on page 25. That's where you will find that training outline. It's going to help orient you to the sections and have all of the content in one place for you. And then on page 6 of our producer workbook is where the producer-focused content is going to start, again with that producer-focused outline and the background materials for producers. We also, of course, have the Module 1 slide deck that is available on the website with a clickable link on that online version of the Facilitator guide. All right, so now that we have all of our things in place, let's jump in. So let's start by looking at an outline of the contents that we will look at in Module 1. So again, page 25 in our Facilitator guide, we have the training module outline. This module, when implemented in a producer training, is designed to take it about an hour, again, depending on those number of optional activities that you choose to include. That does not include the optional content that we've added that is focused on the child and adult care food program and summer food service program. So we estimate that if you would want to add that additional content, it would take about 20 minutes. So in addition to that optional content, we've got 2 other primary sections that we focus on here. One is section A, child nutrition programs, and then section B, which is local food sourcing and procurement in school meal programs. So continuing on in the Facilitator's guide, you'll see this same structure in all of the modules. So we've got that same basic content and structure in all of the modules. In the background section, you'll find that's core concepts, the core concepts that are going to be addressed throughout this module. Digging deeper into core concepts, again, that's for you as a facilitator. If there are areas of content that you maybe just need a little more background on to feel confident in being able to train and share on, those digging deeper resources are great just to familiarize yourself a little bit more with some of these core concept resources. And then we have those bringing the farm to school case studies. And for this section, we've got 3 case studies, but they come in both written forms as well as several have associated podcasts as well that connect back with some of the content in section 1 here. We also have those key terms, which we'll talk about a little bit more depth. And of course, you can always reference back to that glossary. And then those facilitator tips, just to give you some hints and high-level ideas for how you might want to approach bringing this module to life for producers. So moving along, let's start to jump into the module content itself and how you might approach presenting this content in a local producer training. So on the Facilitator guide, page 27, slide 2, you will start by seeing the learning objectives for producers. What are producers going to walk away with from this section? So we hope that this section gives producers an opportunity to understand the scope and diversity of child nutrition programs, to understand those basic ideas of how child nutrition programs plan menus, process or prepare foods, and how that producer's product might help them meet the needs of that school market. And we do also want to touch on the basic regulations that govern school food procurement and how that impacts the choices that child nutrition programs make within their purchasing. So as you can see from those objectives, some of that language is probably unfamiliar for producers. There is going to be some language when we talk about school meal programs and child nutrition programs that we really want to help orient and help producers feel comfortable around as kind of that first step in understanding how to connect with the school market, just to understand and have that shared language. So one way we encourage you to do that is with the Jeopardy game that Tammy mentioned. So in the Facilitator guide, we've got some in-depth instructions on how you can create a virtual Jeopardy game board. So you can make it fully clickable, input and embed all of these different questions and vocabulary and make it really interactive in the virtual setting. So that's one option. You can also take a lower tech option and just play like we're going to do today with a little question, and you can provide what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide the definition, and then someone is going to get some points for their team by responding, of course, with the question. Don't forget how we play Jeopardy, with responding with the question. So let's give it a try. Again, remember, you are playing for your team, the pride of your state, I'll say. You're playing for the pride of your state. So everybody get ready. You can either put your response in the chat box or unmute, which is usually quicker. It's probably the better way to get points. Unmute and respond. So I'm going to read the definition of one of the key terms found in Module 1. Again, you can find those key terms listed on page 26, and you can also find the full definitions in your glossary on page 105. So your first answer, and I'm looking for the question in response, is a commercial enterprise or a nonprofit organization that acts on behalf of a school food authority by managing or directing any aspect of the school meal program.
What is food service management company?
All right, Alexis gets a point. Alexis, what state are you in?
New Hampshire.
Great. All right, point for New Hampshire. All right, next answer. The act of purchasing goods and services, for example, food for a child nutrition program.
What is procurement?
Oh, I think I saw it in the chat box
Yeah, I think
first.
Shannon got it first. Shannon, remind us where you're from.
All
One for
right.
Connecticut.
All right. Thanks, guys. Great work. All right. So again, just another way to get folks talking and start to explore some of that language a little bit. So after we have kind of that orientation, develop some shared language, we're going to jump into section A around child nutrition programs. Again, to orient you, you can see in that thumbnail on the Facilitator guide, the slides relevant to this section are going to start on page 27 on slide 4. So we want to start this section with a big customization and regionalization opportunity. This first slide, we recommend that you just start to really orient producers and give them a picture of what farm to school looks like in your state or region, both a visual picture as well as some facts, numerical information, some of the highlights of what's happening around local purchasing in schools and farm to school in your state. So hopefully between your team, you've got great resources to identify some of the key pieces that you want to lift up and highlight for producers, whether that's lifting up and elevating the reach and the scope of child nutrition programs in your state, the amount of local food purchased, maybe some of those really exciting harvest of the month or state taste plates. This is a place to just really lift up the highlights and paint that picture of farm to school within your state. So after painting that visual picture or providing that background for producers, we recommend that you start with a video as just another way to engage and for producers to see the work of farm to school in action. So Tammy is going to play a sample video. Again, this one is not from your region, but we know there are great videos out there. Talking to you, Maine, I've seen some of those around your state and in this region. So here's just a sample of a type of video that you might want to share with producers to get them familiar with what farm to school looks like in action.
Farm to School has huge opportunity to support children in getting healthy, and on the other hand, it's going to be supporting farmers. It is the largest potential market and buyer of fresh local produce in this state.
We have this opportunity to bring more fresh fruits and vegetables into the schools to create more opportunities for small farms to supply the school and to really transform our state's food economy.
My husband Dash and I, we founded Hip Agriculture back in 2011. We chose this path to become farmers when I became pregnant with our first child. So we've been able to raise our children on the farm, feeding them really fresh food.
When we got the word that Kohala schools were going to be the first pilot for farm to school in the state, we were so thrilled. We jumped at the opportunity to become a supplier to the Kohala cafeteria.
Farm to School is taking out the big distributors and inserting our local farmers. Instead of taking frozen foods and microwaving them, we're taking fresh foods and cooking them from scratch. Garden to Cafeteria takes Farm to School one step further. Food that the students are growing is harvested by them and delivered by the students to the cafeteria. It also presents an opportunity for the students to take home fresh produce that they helped grow. It'll help create a demand for more local produce.
It's also all of the educational programs we do to reconnect youth to the land, to farms, to where their food comes from.
After the pilot of Kohala Complex, the state decided that they want to expand Farm to School to all 256 schools across the state, which is almost 200,000 meals a day.
This is a huge opportunity to revitalize agriculture statewide because we've never had such a large market. If they just serve banana smoothies one extra day a week, that's thousands of pounds of bananas that Hawaii farmers can grow for local youth. Gardens are the best places for young people to learn.
The hands-on, experiential, tactile learning where they're smelling, they're tasting, and they're part of cooking it and preparing it, that's the way we're going to get children to eat healthier new foods.
We're building a pilot and a model for what Farm to School looks like.
That's our role, is really committed to making and helping the DOE and the Kohala cafeteria work out the kinks so that we can say what works and doesn't work. Hawaii has the potential to be the example for the world of what it means to live sustainably and feed our people well. We are working on building the farmers that are going to be needed to grow the food for our communities.
Great. Thank you, Tammy. So again, we definitely recommend that we do have some recommendations for videos from different regions. Find one that highlights work that may parallel what's happening in your state and uplift some of those themes that you really want to uplift about what's happening in the work that you're doing or that's happening in your state. So after producers get a chance to see what Farm to School looks like in action, we want them to kind of reconnect with what are they thinking about when they think about school meals. So we prompt the question, what are your school meal memories? What's the first thing you think of when you think of school meals? So take a moment to think back. Maybe it was a long time ago, maybe it wasn't so long ago, and share in the chat box, what are some of the school meal memories that you have? White rice in styrofoam bowls, cardboard pizza, cheese bagels and tinfoil, heavy on the carbs. Oh, lucky tray day. McRib sandwiches, pizza and French fries. Somebody has fresh from scratch baked rolls. That seems like a lovely memory. Scratch cooking. So some really positive memories, it sounds like, things that really evoke really happy feelings. But then there's also these other things that don't necessarily connect to the fresh food that we think about in school meals now. That's awesome, Michaela. Michaela used to talk about the cows, the names of the cows that provided milk for those cartons. Great. So you can see there's really diverse experiences with school food. Some positive, not so positive. What we really want to reinforce and maybe ask is, Does the school food you remember, is that the same as what you're seeing in these videos? And think about what school food can be when you can build that connections to producers. Lots of churros in schools. I missed out on that. So we really want to kind of find that opportunity for producers to connect to what school food can be and remind them that there are lots of incredible school food service directors who are working really hard to provide that experience of fresh food and providing the best quality food for kids. So after sharing that kind of pair, you can do it as a pair and share, or you could do it as just a popcorn style, or have folks share at their tables, depending on the format and what kind of atmosphere you have with your producers. We're going to jump into a little more of that nitty gritty around school meal programs. Always thinking back to that purpose of what does a producer need to understand to make the decision, one, if school sales are right for them, and then two, to be able to best do business with school buyers. So coming to slides 12 through 14 here, in 12, we start to address school meal by the numbers. Let's see, I think I apologize, I'm on the wrong section here. So before we do that, before we go to school meal by the numbers, I'm jumping ahead for you. We are going to start to establish that overview of child nutrition programs. So in this section, we start to orient producers about what school meals look like now, again, that they can be full of delicious local foods that span the plate. This section is also a place where we start to break down some of that language and how we talk about the programs that we'll be discussing. So we did start earlier by talking about child nutrition programs, but we recognize that that is not the most farmer-friendly term and is a mouthful. So we talk about this transition in this part. We want to be really clear from here on, we're going to talk about school meal programs. One, we find that language is a little bit more accessible. Also, we know that there are some programs that are not necessarily within the K through 12 school day. So the child adult care food program and the summer food service program, that there's some nuance to those programs that we address in the additional optional material. But for the rest of this module and throughout the training, we're really going to be honing a little bit more on these school meal programs that are served kind of throughout the traditional school day. So school lunch, school breakfast, and the fresh fruit and vegetable program. So after that kind of language orientation, then we're going to start to move into school meal programs by the numbers and some of those partners. So again, looking at Facilitator Guide, page 30 and 31, we're on slides 12 and 13. This is, again, another opportunity for regionalization. So here we have some of those national numbers that we're seeing how maybe small amounts of numbers can really add up to big spending across the state and across the country from school meal programs. And again, thinking about the market opportunity, what does that mean for market opportunities for producers? Again, a place to remind folks about that local and state information and spend that you might have information on. Next, we also want to briefly explain who are these key players potentially within farm to school, who producers might run into within the trainings, or they might need to connect with throughout their process of connecting or developing relationships with schools. And this is just to help clarify, they're going to be at a training potentially that is hosted or supported by potentially state agencies or state agencies as partners in that. It is a USDA funded training. USDA was, of course, a big part and partner in developing this. And so kind of clarifying what the role of USDA is in the school meal programs, how they feed or funnel into state agencies. And then importantly, we're going to be asking them to connect with those local food authorities, those school food authorities on the ground level. So just helping to reiterate those different roles and how they might come into play as farmers start to build those connections with school food partners. So moving along, we start to address the key drivers that determine what school meal programs, determines how school meal programs purchase and serve food. So one of those being meal pattern and nutrition requirements, and the other being meal costs. We know those are key areas that producers might need to understand to help understand the decision-making of school food buyers. So again, the purpose here, when we look at the school meal nutrition requirements and patterns, is to uplift what school buyers are looking for, to help producers to start to think about what they might already be growing or have capacity to grow that might connect and might be a good fit for what school buyers are looking for. So in some of our previous panels, for example, we've heard from producers who have really met a specific need around the red orange vegetable. The schools in their community were really struggling to meet that requirement to be serving red orange vegetables on a regular basis. And so their sweet potatoes were a great option to fill that need. And so because they had some of this background and understanding what school meal programs needed, they knew that they could offer this as a connection. So again, just coming back to how can producers utilize this information to think about what products are going to be a good fit for schools. So after we give a little bit of background on that, just pause for a moment to give producers a minute to think about, now that I know what schools might be looking at, starting to think about what am I already growing? So encourage producers to take a few moments to kind of utilize that information, which is really going to set the stage for a deep dive into that topic in Module 3. So continuing along, that other key component around meal costs. So here, again, we're providing a realistic view. We want to be real about what school meal programs have to spend on food, but also dispel some of those myths that schools can't afford to purchase local, which we know is not always true. Schools are doing great local purchasing. So we want to demonstrate that the volume of meals served creates an opportunity for high dollar sales potentially. And there is significant spending from that school meal program side. And we'll dig into this later modules, of course, but this is really setting the stage for thinking about exactly what Tammy talked about earlier, that it's about finding that right combination of product and volume. And that brings us to our next topic, which was really about the diversity of school meal programs and thinking about finding that right match that matches producers' capacity and interest. So we start by looking at the different volumes, and just to reorient, we are in the Facilitator Guide, page 35 to 36, in that section titled The Diversity of School Meal Programs. So we want to highlight, again, here we see that one size does not fit all, and that is true for schools and school meal programs as well. We see that depending on the size of the school or district, we see depending on the age group, and depending on how the food is served, that there can be a variety of volume needs. So producers can really make that match different program sizes or different district sizes that can be a good fit for what they're doing or where they would want to expand to. We also see in this section, looking at different type of program kitchens, knowing that kitchen equipment is going to be a real influencer on what types of products that schools can purchase, whether that's value added, slightly processed, or if they have scratch cooking capacity. So in this is a great opportunity to provide producers an insight into what a school kitchen might look like. So Tammy is going to share with us a brief video that gives some insights into a school kitchen.
It's just a good concept for children to be able to relate where the food they eat comes from and know that it's right within their own region. Well, when we first found out that collards were going to be available through the Farm to School program, thought back to my childhood, and every time my mom cooked collards, it was in the biggest pot that we had in the house. So I looked in the back of our cook chill department. I said, there's 2 huge pots. I bet we could cook collards in those. It was a little trial and error at first, getting the seasoning right. And of course, the staff was a little wary at first. But if there's one constant, it's going to be change. We're going to be challenged and required to do new things, and that's a good thing because we are creating change in our children's dietary habits and improving them. So if we expect our kids to improve, then we've got to do the same.
They good. They look good. Very good, Sheree. They're ready to go.
We think that by creating demand, we can also help stimulate the supply. That's one of the largest barriers that we have, is strictly being able to get the supply at the level that we would use.
1 case of sweet peas, 1 case, 3 cans of mixed fruit, 4 bags of pears. Sadler.
What's unique about us is we do deliver groceries and supplies to every school every day.
4 bags of collard greens.
That's about 22,000 lunches and close to 9,000 breakfasts a day.
2 cucumbers.
What we deliver today is served in the school the next day. Strawberries, watermelons, kids really like. But to get them to try the vegetables takes a little more encouragement sometimes. We found that it really helps to work with other stakeholders in the farm to school and agriculture industry. We're helping promote Food Corps and Cooperative Extension and North Carolina farmers. They're helping promote school lunch.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. So I think that video is just a great example to be able to see kind of the volume, see the different kitchen setup. You know, in this case, you have a cook and chill facility, and see how that can add up and how different schools are utilizing local product. So of course, if there are resources and if you have a school food service director who could take you on a virtual tour, that's another great option, an option to feature some of the local work. So after that video, we jump into our next applied activity. So that applied activity you can see on the facilitator guide on page 36. That'll be on slide 25 of the slide deck. And then if you want to flip to page 10 of your producer workbook is where we have the worksheet that goes with this activity. And this activity is all about exploring the farm to school and food purchasing, local food purchasing within your specific state or district or school food authority through the farm to school census data. And now that we have brand new, wonderful USDA farm to school census data, there's a lot more to explore. So I'm actually going to share, if you haven't yet had a chance to take a look at the new website, it's wonderful. And one thing I'll say, in your participant packet, this is a bit of an older version. We did do an updated worksheet that aligns a little bit better with the current census results and how they're laid out. So on the website, the newer version of the producer workbook has the new version of the worksheet. So we just wanted to make sure that it aligned and was really clear in the flow and aligned with the new data. So I'm going to ask you some questions from that new version of the worksheet that is available online, but don't want you to get too confused. So again, for points and victory for your team, I'm going to ask you to do some navigating on this site to answer some of the questions that producers might want to explore to learn about school food purchasing and what schools are purchasing within their locale. So when you're on the Farm to School Census website, which I think someone just dropped in the chat for us there, you can navigate to the census results. And if you scroll down a little bit here, let's navigate here. All right, so if we go to the Sorry, guys, I feel like this looks different every day. I'm so sorry. I just looked at this earlier. How about the, we want to look for our SFA specifically. Are our USDA folks on who can help us navigate?
Hi, this is Sibel. I am here.
Hi,
I will
Sibel.
say, I will say that this is something that's changed on the national office side, and I am a regional person, so I don't know that I
Cool.
can necessarily speak to all of the changes that are being made, but it is being updated. So we mostly encourage people to explore in their own time. I know that's not very
Great.
helpful.
No,
but I
that's
am
great.
here.
Thank you, Sibel. I
What is it?
appreciate it.
What is
I
it you're
think
looking for, Lacey?
We found it. I was looking for how to
Okay.
search for the SFA, but I think we found it. Okay. So if you just keep scrolling down, because there's all these new cool maps and things that weren't even there when I looked at it yesterday, I think. So there's
Yeah,
so
they're
much
definitely
being updated.
updating the functionality.
But one feature I did want to make sure that everybody knew about was this really cool option to be able to look for school food authorities by your zip code. So you can find school food authorities within your region, even if you don't know the name, but you can find them in your locale. So I would love for someone to take a look, find a school food authority within your locale, take a look at what information they're sharing, and can you tell us what the top local food item purchased by that SFA was? So you can unmute or add in the chat box the name of the school food authority that you found in your vicinity and what the top local item purchased was.
Shannon still needs a little bit more orientation.
All right. So if we go to our census results overview, not at all. I clearly was as well. And continue to scroll down, you'll see these super cool maps and some background information. And then you'll find this green bar that'll allow you to do some searching. So you can search within your state, or you can find your nearby school food authorities. All right, Alexis in the chat box. Bedford, top is apples. Top apples in Middleton too. Great. So, that's just, there's so much great information there. Clearly still kind of navigating it. Encourage you to explore a little bit before you throw producers in there, but we do have some more explicit instructions in that newer worksheet as well. So that's a great way for producers to familiarize themselves with what is being purchased out there and even what districts might be interested in buying if they're looking to identify folks to develop relationships with. So a great resource, thanks to SDA, and great information continuing to come out there. All right. So that brings us to our next section, section B, the second half of this module 1, around local food sourcing and procurement in school meals. So our approach to this section is to, again, provide producers enough information to be able to talk to and understand the decision-making and position of school food buyers, to be able to have that shared conversation. So reorienting ourselves on page 37 of our facilitator guide, we're going to be starting in section B there. So we start by looking at the farm to school supply chain. Again, understanding and helping producers who these key players might be and what those multiple pathways of getting food from producer to school, and thinking about kind of where they might fit in within those pathways. And these pathways are further explored in module 2, which we'll hear about later, but this is really just to kind of set that stage. We then start to talk about, in slides 28 to 30, we dig into what serving local food looks like in schools. including discussion around how schools might define local and why that might matter, both for the school and for the producer. We start to think about how schools are sourcing local food, within that farm to school supply chain. Where is local food getting into that supply chain? This is a great opportunity to start to regionalize if there are specific distributors, processors, retailers, what that looks like within your state or within your locale. And we also touch on how schools incorporate local food. Again, we touched on this a little bit in the introduction and want to tie it back to those many ways that local food can get into schools and connect to children. So beyond the standard meal program, or incorporated into the standard meal program with special events like the Harvest of the Month that we talked about, the state plates, tasting and educational activities, special events. So there's ways to start to build relationships that may eventually lead to those purchasing relationships or larger purchasing relationships, to start with those smaller events or activities. And this is a great place to feature stories from producers on how they cultivated those connections, how they maybe started with some Harvest of the Month sales and continue to build. We heard from our speakers yesterday about how this Harvest of the Month relationship was really an important platform developing relationships to their school food service partners. We also want to help producers understand the timing and the sense of flow for school food purchasing, because we know it's different. There is a lot more planning and preparation that might go into school food service sales and planning than to, say, restaurant sales or maybe other wholesale markets. And so this is just an example that, again, can be customized based on what it looks like for school buyers within your region. But we also want to highlight, when should producers be starting to make those relationships and make those contacts? When are those decisions about menuing and purchasing being made for the year, and help them understand that they may not be able to just reach out and make a sale the next day, that it may make some relationship development and getting the timing right and knowing when schools are making those decisions. So that takes us to our next applied activity. We're not going to do this activity today, but I'd encourage you to take a look at it and read through it. This one is all about understanding the different aspects of programs, of school food programs, whether that's size, scale, type of program, and how that fits and makes a good relationship with producers. So in your producer workbook, we have 3 mini case studies. So they're about half a page or so of mini case study that talks about the relationship between a producer and a school buyer. And so this activity encourages producers to read that mini case study and then discuss what makes it a good fit. What are the different aspects that work for the producer and work for the school food buyer? And these mini case studies are pulled from these larger case studies that we have available too. So we've got full case studies as well as podcasts for several of these as well. And this is a great time to remind producers of those different resources. So in your training, you might, as you have time, encourage producers to read and discuss. You could do those in tables. And you can also, that's something that they could do following up as well, and make sure they know that those stories are available to really see what that work looks like in action. So finally, wrapping up, we want to jump into these final slides just around high-level school food procurement 101. So the next module, in module 2, we go really into depth on what school sales look like from that producer side. And this is really just that high-level orientation, again, to help producers understand the perspective of the school buyer and kind of that rhythm of procurement and what that relationships look like. So in that section, we'll cover the procurement standards that school buyers adhere to and what that might mean for how producers sell and what school buyers are looking for. We talk about the geographic preference and how that can impact local producers. We talk about procurement methods and purchasing thresholds. Again, this is an important place to make sure that that information is updated. We know that there's the federal standard. We need to make sure that that is specific to the state standard. And then we just give a high-level overview of the procurement process. What is that flow going to look like from the solicitation down to the school food service buyer managing the contract, and how will that relationship look for the producer? So with a lot of information, obviously, and then we want to start to kind of wrap up and bring those pieces together. So the final section you'll see starts on page 44, slide 38, and this is around conclusion and action planning. So again, just bringing these pieces together. So one of the first pieces of our conclusion is another opportunity to earn points for your team. So this is a true-false game. And what we have here for each slide is a statement, and you just have to tell us whether that's true or false. So again, we will take either chat. I think Tammy's checking chat to see who chimes in first, or we can take verbal as well. So looks like we've got folks on it already. So looks like first one in was Stacy in New Hampshire. So if I'm not a fruit and vegetable producer, I cannot sell my products to child nutrition programs. False. Local foods can span the plate. All right. Next one. The only way to get my products to children is through school lunch.
False.
All right. I think I saw Cheryl first. Yes, false. Wide variety of child nutrition programs. All right. Schools might be particularly interested in the sweet potatoes I grow because they are required to serve red and orange vegetables. All right, I think I saw Hannah first. True. We just talked about those sweet potatoes. All right. There is no way that schools can afford to purchase my products with their spending limitations. Vina first, I think.
You're doing better at keeping track.
All right, well, you're giving the points, Tammy, so
I am getting
we'll partner.
Okay.
All right, I think this is our last one here. Yes, that was false, correct. Different school food authorities and different child nutrition programs require different volumes of product. All right, I think we got Hannah again first. All right, true. Okay, I think this is the last one. I keep lying about it. The United States Department of Agriculture dictates food safety requirements for schools. All right, Stacy came in with a false. Established at the state or food service authority level. All right, good work, racking up those points. So after we have kind of an interactive way to wrap things up, we also want to give producers an opportunity to reflect on the questions that have come up through this section and come back to that action planning that Tammy talked about in depth. So that's when we bring producers back to their action plan, again, that's on that page 54 of their producer workbook, and give them a little bit of time, maybe as you're transitioning between sections and activities, to reflect on some of those questions and the action planning. So before we wrap up, I do just want to make sure that you all are familiar with where to find that additional optional content about CACFP and summer food. So that's in your Appendix C, as Tammy mentioned yesterday, but that's on page 117 in your Facilitator guide. And again, there's a full slide deck available to support that optional content if that is something of interest to the producers that you're working with. All right, so that is module 1.
Okay, well, good afternoon, y'all. As it says there on the slide, my name is Robert Marziani. I'm coming at you from San Antonio, Texas, where it's still summertime here. It's like 97 degrees, so we haven't quite got fall yet. I hope y'all are enjoying a little bit more comfortable weather. But as Tammy mentioned, we're going to do module 2. You're going to see here quickly that we structure all the modules very similar in the way that we present the information. It's just that each module really asks and tries to answer a couple of different questions. So if you'll envision or see what we're thinking the producers are looking at, we've kind of got them in a place. We've shown them what farm to school is. We've talked about numbers, that it's big. It's, it's a breakfast program. It's a lunch program. It's a fruit and vegetable snack program. It's if it could also be selling to daycare centers, adult daycare centers, a lot of procurement that could be going on. You saw the exercise to really regionalize the numbers. And so we're hoping we've got their attention. We think we've got their attention to say, this is what's happening. This is the opportunity. So now we're envisioning the producers are together and they're thinking, okay, you got my attention, but how in the world am I going to get my stuff to the schools? I live, 50 miles from nowhere. How am I going to get it there? And who am I going to talk to? How do I talk to them? How do I do this? So Tammy, if you would get to the second slide, please. We're going to be introducing you to, is that slide 2, Tammy? I think that's slide 3.
Yes, it is.
Will you put it on slide 2, por favor?
It is on slide 2.
All right, so we're going to be introducing you to a number of tools, just like Lacey did in module 1. Again, you'll see that we structure the presentation very similar. We're just answering different questions. And I would ask you to also engage with me as we go to different pages in the producer workbook and in the facilitator guide. I think it's easier as we get used to using the actual physical tools. So you'll see, let's go to page producer workbook, page 17. You'll see that that's on the right hand of the screen there. You'll see that we're going to provide a bunch of tools to you, just like we did in module 1 and we'll do in the other module. We're going to have case studies for you. We're going to have worksheets. We're going to have handouts. And if you'll see the text right there, kind of right down at the bottom of the page, this is really the overriding consideration that we want to keep in mind as we go through module 2. Producers sell to schools for different reasons, but ultimately they want to know how to make the sale. By the end of this module, you should have the information needed to assess your operational capacity, and this is talking to the producer. Remember, this is the producer workbook. You will have the information needed to assess your capacity to meet the standards for various marketing channels. Next slide, please. And so you can see a very similar structure, module 2, just like it was presented in module 1. So we got 2 different sections. We'll go over them in detail here in a minute. But you can see, and this is on page 13 of the facilitator guide. If you would go to page 13, you can see as we move from left to right on the page, the different columns. We have the topics and the estimated duration of that particular section. Now, as we've all said, we've kind of created a way of presenting this material. This is a guidebook, not a rule book. So you can certainly, depending on your venue, whether it's a producer, a yearly conference of producers and you only have 2 or 3 hours in a workshop, well, then you're going to have to tailor what we've presented here. But we have created a way of presenting it that when you do all 4 modules in the introduction, really take about 2 days to do. So in that structure, this module 2, you'll see we have section A, we're guessing is going to take about 45 minutes. Section B is going to take anywhere from an hour to 75 minutes. And you'll see as you move across the different learning objectives, this is what we really want the producers to learn in each of these sections. And as I mentioned, the question we're anticipating that they have in their mind is how do they get their product from their farm that's in the middle of nowhere to the schools where it's going to be eaten. And then the second section is how do we talk to the school food service personnel? What are some of the rules and regulations that they operate under? What's some of the lingo? What's some of the language that they use that we have to be able to understand? And those are created in the core. You'll see those in the core concepts. And then in order to really strengthen the information presented there, we're going to suggest a bunch of activities and some materials to use. So this is very much structured the same way module 1 is that you saw Lacey talk about, and you'll see Margot tomorrow and Andy, another coworker of mine, talk about tomorrow afternoon. Next slide, please. This is page 46 and 47. It's just a quick presentation of some of the core concepts. Again, this shouldn't be surprising to a lot of you. If you'll go to the facilitator guide on page 46, as I get there. You'll see some of the core concepts that we're trying to make sure that the farmers understand. I won't read them all, but you can see them. Distributor and wholesale marketing practices, obviously very important. On-farm food safety. Food safety has become, at least within the fruit and vegetable industry, an amazingly important topic over the last 6 or 8 years. Certainly with the Food Safety Modernization Act that you're all familiar with, which is not voluntary anymore. It is federal law. There's certainly GAP certification, which are voluntary certifications that we'll talk about also. But those are the core concepts, and that's really what we're trying to make sure that the producers understand as we go through the material for this module. And you'll see an example of some of the case studies. That's another opportunity for all of y'all as you do your trainings in your state to regionalize or customize what are the case studies that you're going to use. And you may even, between now and the time you start doing your training, develop your own case studies that are very specific to a given region or a state that you're going to be doing it. Next slide, please. Some more key terms. This is page 105. If you'll go with me to page 105. I'll read a few of them. I won't read many. Again, this is trying to develop a fluency in this vocabulary. Child nutrition program director. I picked that one because oftentimes you'll hear a lot of different names for the personnel. Who are the actors on the school side, and what are their titles? Here we've decided to use the term child nutrition program director or school nutrition director. And basically it's the individual responsible for planning, administering, implementing. Here's another one down this page. Again, I'm looking at page 105 in the facilitator guide. Collective purchasing. This is going to become important later in one of the sections. Used when school districts participate in state and regional purchasing cooperatives. I will say here in Texas, we have a collection of organizations called education service centers. I don't know if y'all have them in any of your states, but they are a regional entity. Texas is divided into 20 regions. There's region 1, region 2, on and on. And they, a lot of them come together to do collective purchasing of different items, particularly paper goods. So far, there's not anybody doing collective purchasing of fresh produce, but there are some in doing meat also. So this whole idea of collective purchasing is very important here in Texas. Here's another one that'll become very important in Module 4 that Andy's going to talk about tomorrow, enterprise budget. Tammy mentioned it earlier as one of the key skills that producers have to have, is they have to know what it costs them to actually produce what it is they're thinking about selling. Because if the school district's going to come to them with a bid that says, I want to pay you $25 delivered price for tomatoes, a farmer's got to know if that's really worth his or her while or not. And the way you do that, if you'll see the definition of an enterprise budget, a listing of all estimated income expenses associated with a specific enterprise. In this case, it would be tomato farm. So farmers got to know how much it costs. Then you'll see some more terms on page 106, and then I think it's important to look to page 107, and you'll see all the acronyms. That's a big part of being fluent in USDA talk, is learning all the acronyms that get talked about all the time. FSD, FSMA, which I just mentioned, FSMA, HACCP, GAP, all of those things producers really need to know in order to be fluent in this world. The next slide is clearly the learning objectives. What the producers have to know as they get finished with this module, really before they go on to the next modules. You'll see the first learning objective is the best marketing channels. That really is related to the question that I mentioned to you earlier. I'm a producer, and how do I get my stuff to the schools? Well, this is the way you're going to learn how to do it. What are the best marketing channels? There are a lot of options open to producers. And then the last 4 learning objectives relate to the food service side. Who are the people? How do they present their offer to the producers? There's a very specific and legal way they have to do that. The producers have to learn how to read what's called solicitations. And in those solicitations, they'll be able to read what are the requirements from the vendors, what are the product quality standards. And then another set of skills that we want to talk about in this module is how do producers go communicate, approach and communicate with the food service directors and other people involved in the procurement. I'm going to turn my, that's okay, I got here a little. All right, so now let's look at section A. Again, as we're suggesting, it's going to take about 45 minutes. Next slide, please, Tammy. Here's an optional activity. We're just going to go over a quick example again in this module, just like Lacey did, just to show you how it can really be used in all the different modules. You can see that it is going to be a Jeopardy example. And again, I'll ask a couple of questions and you can get points for your state team. But you can see that the categories of questions that we've all seen on the Jeopardy board, right, are the terms that we want producers to learn how to use. So market channels, school buyers, quality standards, vendor requirements. Those are the categories on the Jeopardy board. And so I'm just going to have a couple of examples, and just like Lacey did in module 1, the first person to unmute and ask the question will earn a point for his or her state team. All right, so let's pick one here. We're going to go marketing channels for 100. All right, a business that aggregates products for distribution of food at a local or regional scale.
What is Food Hubs?
Thank you, Alexis. That's correct. Alexis, what state are you with?
New Hampshire.
Okay. Let's try one more. We're going to do school buyers. Utilize when school districts participate in state or regional purchasing cooperatives and buying groups in order to help school districts obtain greater buying power. Okay, I don't see anybody hitting the buzzer. Maybe, is there someone?
What is collective purchasing?
That's correct. Alexis, was that you again?
Yes.
Okay, New Hampshire is winning the deal. All right. So anyway, you get the point. Jeopardy is a fun way to present the information. It is a way of presenting the categories as the concepts that we want, the farmers and the ranchers to get comfortable with. And so it's an easy way to get your audience comfortable with what they're talking about. So next slide, please, Tammy. Okay, y'all saw this visual quickly in Lacey's presentation, but right now we're going to go into a little bit more detail. It's all about helping the producers understand the different ways to answer that question that we think they have in their mind. How do I get my stuff from my farm to the schools? And there's a lot of different ways. You can also note that this is also in the producer workbook on page 18. But you'll see there's on the left, there's two different subcategories, if you wish, of intermediated, what we're calling intermediated marketing channel. Somebody in the middle is picking up the product from the farmer and taking it to the school. And we'll talk a little bit about detail in a minute. And then the second major way is direct to school. And there are actually a lot of different ways that are really fit in that pathway also. We'll talk about it in detail in just a minute. Tammy, next slide. So let's look at explaining the intermediated channels. There are a number of ways to do that. Here's one that you might not have ever thought about before, and that's a local retail outlet. I will say, in my experience of doing this in Texas, and I've been doing this for many, many years, I have seen that done in very rural scenarios where the school and is maybe a little bit farther away from the producer than he or she really wants to go, and so they cut a deal to get the local grocery store to provide some cooler space or just some space in the back, because the food service director is sending a truck over to the retailer anyway to buy something. And so in order to save the producer a little bit of wear and tear on whatever vehicle he or she is using, they let the retailer will say, well, in order to generate maybe the schools will buy more from me, or in order to generate some good community I'll just save a little space here in my cooler for a local farmer who's really going to be selling to the school. I have seen that work in rural areas. The other ones, I have also seen a value-added processor become a middle person or intermediary for the same reason. The farmer is providing the raw material to a processor. Normally, it's a very simple process going on. It's either slicing and dicing, or it's freezing. So there's not much processing going on. And so the processor is doing their job, doing the procedure that they normally do, and they set aside for the local school district that's coming there anyway. And so that's a way that producers can really create interesting relationships with either a retailer or a processor to become an intermediary. It may not even be a monetary thing. It may just a way to help the relationships happen there at a local level. And so there's a couple other ones there that we'll talk about in detail here in a minute, but we've got retail aggregation at food hubs or local and regional distributors. Next slide, please, Tim. And here's where we're going to show a video that will demonstrate to you a food hub. In the Northeast, y'all have a lot of food hubs that y'all will be able to think about having as partners in your producer training. I know you got Red Tomato, you got Common Market that sells out of Philly into New York and DC, I believe, and you got Fresh Rhode Island. There's a lot of hubs in the Northeast, so you'll have a really great opportunity to involve hubs in your training. Tammy, you want to play the video, please?
Of producers that we work with. Those producers are primarily within a 50-mile radius of us here in Brattleboro, but the more time goes on, the more that we're able to bring in some producers and some special products from a little bit farther afield. So we have this roster of producers, and we list on a weekly basis, twice weekly. We offer their products to our customers through a web portal, an e-commerce site, essentially. When they do order from us through the website or any other way that we then enter into our web platform, that delivery is made as a unit on a set delivery day, up to twice a week right now, and the customer is invoiced for that order as a unit. So no matter how many producers they're buying from at once, they're getting one invoice. We technically do take ownership of the product, but a lot of the product that we sell on what we call a just-in-time basis. We have an order cycle. Customers place their orders, we cut it off, and we assemble our purchase orders for farms in our area. We send out those purchase orders to farms, and they pick, wash, and pack to order on a one-day turnaround, typically 1 to 2 days. And then we deliver that freshly picked, freshly packed product straight to the customer. When it comes to produce to schools, almost all of that is still picked up straight from the farm, delivered the next day. And that's something that we take a lot of pride in being able to do. I think our customers really value knowing that when they're ordering from the farm, they know it's just down the road. They know they're not getting something that's been stored for days or weeks. They're getting something straight from the farm.
Thank you, Tammy. That's just a quick example. Can you get back to the slides? Again, y'all probably all know a local food hub. We here in Texas, we are just starting to develop some food hubs. Here's an example of an AMS resource, USDA AMS resource, their food hub page. I encourage you, if you're going to use this as an example, as a resource for your training, that you check it out ahead of time. My experience with it is that it's really outdated unless they've done some work to really keep it going. We really are trying to develop food hubs here. Transparency, I'm on the board of Common Market Texas here, and very active in developing a common market here in Texas and helping them do farm to school. And I anticipate that they'll be very active with us as we go about doing producer trainings here in Texas. So as you can see the link there down at the bottom of that slide. That does go to the AMS page that supposedly has all the hubs listed for any given zip code or state. Or again, if you're going to use it, I would encourage you to make sure that you've checked it out and make sure it's up to date for your state. I strongly encourage you to have a food hub person at your trainings as often as you can. I think they are a type of actor as an intermediary that could really help a lot of farmers get comfortable with farm to school before they maybe start dealing with other wholesalers. Would you go to the next slide, please, Sam? And those are what I would call either regional distributors or national wholesale distributors. There's certainly plenty of them around. They do a great job with what they do. They tend to contract with bigger farmers who really have a much more investment in infrastructure as far as refrigerated trucks, food safety certifications, really good experience with grading and standards and all of those things that a producer has to be able to do in order to really interact smoothly with big regional distributors or national distributors. So again, there are different types of intermediaries, and we are really going to be focusing on food hubs in our training here in Texas. Next slide, please, Tim. Here are some of the ways that are really a different way of getting in there, and that's direct to school. So we've talked about intermediary, some way, somebody in the middle, and now we're going to talk about the different ways that a farmer could be a direct supply chain. Farmers markets. I have again seen this work in Texas in rural areas. Many small towns in Texas have their either Friday afternoon or Saturday morning farmers market, and they've managed to create an agreement with food service people at the school to come by the farmers market and pick up, rather than asking the farmer to do another delivery. It's a way of really trying to kind of go out of their way for the food service director to make it happen, just so the farmers don't have to make a separate delivery. CSAs, there's a big CSA in Austin, community supported agriculture, that does literally thousands of boxes, that also does has some farm to school work through their CSA. They do CSA delivery to different schools where the teachers buy the product. And so while they're doing that, they've again made an arrangement to sell some wholesale stuff in the same delivery that they're delivering CSA baskets to a collection of teachers or administrative staff. So that's an opportunity that I would encourage you to remind producers that they can incorporate being a direct sale to schools, even as they're going about doing their business, selling in farmers markets, doing CSAs, or other things that they do, selling there locally. The collective purchasing model, we mentioned it a couple of times. There are collective purchasing opportunities that do happen. I don't know if y'all have any of those that you can think of right off the top of your head. But again, it's a way of aggregating product demand. For rural area, a lot of rural schools will do that. So they'll create or they'll identify one school district that will be the drop-off point, and they'll have farmers come deliver. It could be 20 or 30 cases for any given school district, but if there's 4 or 5 of them in the same county, then a farmer can make one delivery and drop off 80 or 100 cases, and then it would be really worth the producer's while to do that, and then the schools get the local product that they need. That's a way of doing collective purchasing. As you would guess, the farmer's going to be thinking in his or her mind, yeah, that's interesting, but what about food safety? There are some drawbacks to farmers saying, I want to play in this game, this farm to school. And so it's important that we make sure that farmers think about them and talk about them, and they'll even think about it in one of the activities we're going to do here in a minute. But let's just look at a couple of them. On the right side, you'll see the drawbacks. Payment. Ooh, that's a big one. A lot of schools have 30-day payment. Farmers, I don't know if any of y'all have been farmers. I've been a farmer. We want payment the same day we deliver the stuff. That's our ideal. And so typically a farmer is not going to get that selling farm to school. And so that's something that a farmer is going to have to consider, the cash flow that this type of selling is going to generate, and how is he going to pay his labor that day, or pay for boxes that day, or all of those things. You're going to have a good handle on cash flow, because payment is not going to happen that day. Vendor establishment. They're going to have to go through a lot of procedures to set up a vendor ID number. They're going to have to show insurance. They're going to have to show, depending on the size of the school district that they're dealing with, that they have refrigerated vehicles. Because most school districts now of any size in Texas, once they get a delivery, they're going to temp it. And if it doesn't meet temp, then the farmer's in trouble, almost regardless of scale, because of the food safety issues that are going on. So those are all some potential drawbacks that we need to make sure that producers think about. But let's look at the benefits also. What greater satisfaction can a farmer have than knowing that his or her product is going to the benefit of his kids, her kids, their neighbors' kids, and everybody else who lives close to them or in the same county? That's about as good as it gets, knowing that your hard work is really helping the kids. So you can create those direct lines of communication with the food service people. You can theoretically do some local decision making once the food service people get some confidence in your ability and a producer's ability to deliver. It also allows you to retain your brand. If branding is important to your farm, selling farm to school is an opportunity where you can sell some product and retain your brand. When you sell typically to regional distributors or big national distributors, you automatically lose your brand. The product becomes their brand, and so that's another consideration for farmers. If a farmer is trying to kind of incorporate farm to school into his marketing mix, where he or she does CSAs and does farmers market and does maybe wholesale sales to a few restaurants, branding and maintaining that branding is important. So that's a consideration that farmers need to make sure that they think about. Next slide, please. And so here's a way to have farmers go about really thinking about all of these questions in an organized manner. You can see that this is from page 25 in your producer workbook. You can see that we've broken the page down into 3 different columns. There's a direct to school opportunity. There's an immediate intermediary with which we're really talking about food hubs and small distributors, or there's the big retail, the big wholesale and national broadline, what we call broadline distributors. And we want the producers to evaluate different aspects of their business as it relates to each of those opportunities. And you can see on the left-hand side, we're guessing that a farmer is going to be able to have a different profit margin if it's direct to school sales, or if it's intermediary through a food hub, or if it's direct to a big regional distributor or a national broadline distributor. So we're asking the producer to rank what they think the opportunities are. Number 1 being the best opportunity, number 5 being the worst. For example, let's take the second one, the second row there, time investment. Direct to school. Would you think that would be the easiest or the worst? Well, it's hard to answer in advance. Each producer has to really look at that from his scenario. It could be different in a rural scenario than in an urban scenario. Typically, the time investment in selling to an intermediary, whether it's a food hub or a distributor, is much less than selling to school, because all you're doing is making one delivery. You make a contract to the food hub buyer or the broadline distributor buyer, and they say, I want 100 cases a week, and boom, there's your contract. You got 100 cases a week to make the delivery. And there's not much time investment in creating that marketing opportunity. I'm not saying there's zero time investment, but it's not the same as really getting to know the food service director and the cafeteria managers and all of the people involved in using your product at the school system. So my immediate thought would be that it would be less time investment selling to a wholesaler than direct to school. But that's the exercise that this page is asking us to take the producers through. And so we would be at the producer training, we would be helping them think about those questions and guiding them and challenging them. A lot of times a producer might think, well, I think that's the number 1. I think that's a slam dunk for me to sell to schools as it relates to time spent marketing, because I know the food service director. She's my cousin. Well, let's think about that, right? That may not be important aspect of the decision. So anyway, this is an exercise that you'll be doing with your producers at the training. And so here we are in section B. As you can see, we're estimating in 60 minutes. That's the way we've structured the curriculum, so to speak, for this section. Again, this is a guidebook, not a rule book, so y'all will be doing it in many different ways. But this relates to the questions that we talked about. Who are the food service people? How do I talk to them? How do they really go about asking for the bid? How do we do this? And so you can see, this is where we're really trying to help farmers learn about what's a solicitation, what's in it. And basically the questions are, what products are they looking for? When do they need them? How much do they need? How much do they need? Any requirements that they have? And again, temperature, certainly in the fresh fruit and vegetable side, is very important, delivery temperature. So that's something that farmers need to be aware of. And also look at the last slide there, slide 24, the product specs. Product specs are oftentimes where farmers forget that they have to pack things in the box that's the same size or pretty much the same size. It's the same variety. Apple farmers might have a lot of different apples, but the school wants Red Delicious. They don't want a box of Red Delicious and Golden Delicious and Fuji's and Galas and all of that. Maybe they do, but it's going to be spec'd anyway. And so here's an opportunity for you really to regionalize all of the different examples that you're using here. If you're at a state where apples are big, and apples are just starting to come out for y'all right now, I know. And so apples are probably on people's minds. And so you can use apples as an example of grades and standards and varieties and sizes and maturity dates and all of those things that the food service directors are going to be speccing in their solicitations. And so that's the way for you really to regionalize that. Next slide, please, Tim. If you'll go to the producer workbook on page 65, let's do that here real quick. You'll see it's an example of a solicitation packet from the Durango Public School in Colorado. It is a good example of all of the different things that I think it's important for producers to see what a solicitation packet asks for and asks about. It's very detailed. You could run the risk of having a producer say, "Whoa, that's too much for me." But hopefully that's what your training is there for. This is another opportunity to regionalize. Ahead of time, I would encourage you to, have a producer training ready to go where there's a solicitation packet that's coming from a school district that's close to where the training is being held. Have somebody from that school district would be ideal so that he or she could actually go over it and talk about it with, from knowing exactly what it's really trying to, the information is trying to transmit to the producers. And so that's you'll see that we've starred this slide with the reminder that this is where you really regionalize your solicitation package, because they're all going to be very detailed. They're going to be different, but they're all going to be similar in the sense that they're going to ask for vendor requirements that are going to specify post-harvest handling, food safety, insurance. Insurance is a big one. Farmers are just going to have to realize that if they want to sell to school districts, they're most likely going to have to have liability insurance, multi-peril insurance, all of those things. It's just a way of getting in the game. The distribution logistics, again, we're back down to the temperature at delivery time is going to be very important for most food service directors, even for small schools. And on the right here, it's something that we need to make sure that farmers think about, because here's a way farmers are always going to be wondering, and Lacey brought the question up earlier in her module, can I really afford to sell to school districts? They're always, looking for the lowest price ever, and they're always going to beat me down. And so how do I make it work? And here are some ways that farmers can stand out for food service directors. And I've seen this many times in Texas over the years, how a farmer gets the business based on doing these things right here. And this is a way of making your brand stand out. You host field trips or farm visits. You come to the classroom for visits for Meet the Farmer Day. Texas has a monthly local product highlight days. And I'm guessing a lot of states do also harvest of the month kind of thing. And so that's where farmers can come to the classrooms and really shine and say, oh, this is Farmer John, and all the kids will be excited about, eating carrots from Farmer John, and that's all they're going to talk about. Provide materials for cafeteria education. The nutrition stuff about carrots, or you do a little carrot growing simulation and put it in the cafeteria of your school. You support school events. That's the way you really shine for your food service directors, that let them know you're committed to making this relationship work. If you look at page 106 in the producer workbook, you'll see that this is a market readiness. Now we're kind of getting the producers to start thinking about, okay, I like this, I like the idea. I really think I want to do this. Am I ready? Well, look at page 106 and look at all the questions that we're going to be asking the producers to answer for themselves. And let's be honest, a lot of times we're not really honest with ourselves when we start answering this question. So part of your role as the trainer when these trainings are going on is to ask the questions out loud and get some answers from out loud. Okay, we all got to have product liability insurance. Raise your hand, all you producers here. Who has product liability insurance? And somebody doesn't raise their hand. So, well, how come you don't have product liability? And blah, 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 and the answer. And so, but the point is, these are the questions that you have to, for fruit and vegetable producers anyway, you need to make them answer and emphasize to them they need to be honest with themselves. This is a way they're going to be able to truly evaluate whether this is what they want to do or not. It's not helpful to them or to us if we take them through all of these trainings and they think they're ready and they sign a contract with the school district and they end up losing their shirt. That's not helpful. And so this is, hopefully we're trying to avoid that. And so here's the second set of skills that we talked about in section B. How do you approach school food service folks, and how do you communicate with them? What's the vocabulary? What's the lingo? What's the timing? And you'll see this here's, we're talking about how do you approach them. Here's some suggestions. Avoid judgment and don't shame school food. That's a big one. I can't tell you how many times in my work in agriculture in Texas, we hear people just routinely shame school food. Don't do that. It's not right. It's not helpful. Be prepared for your conversation. Never show up unannounced. That's a big one. Don't ever do that. Communication is key. A lot of times farmers don't consider themselves very good communicators. This might be an opportunity where you do a role play at a training, and you have a farmer that you've identified during that day who says, "Oh, I don't know how to talk to people," and maybe you do a role play in front of everybody that's kind of humorous and everybody has fun with it, but you try to point out some of the things that a producer really needs to pay attention to as he or she talks to food service people. And remember, here's this kind of the summary statement here there. Remember, developing trusted relationships takes time. Trust is built over time. And so you got to remind producers, you're not going to just go visit with a food service director and make a sale, typically. They got to know each other. They got to know people that know each other. So that's another good point to, if a producer knows someone who knows a food service director, bring that name up. Try to make those connections. And understanding what motivates a school nutrition director. They gotta have certain menus every day that are based on color. And Lacey mentioned that red and orange vegetable. That's a big deal. That one's hard to meet a lot of times. And so that may be your first in once you learn what menus are made up of and how food service directors are struggling to get some of those products. And so you gotta understand here, and this slide right here, we're asking you to really think about how do you regionalize all of your examples. These are pictures here that are that show different food service personnel doing their jobs, and so the point here is one of the things that we want to have producers get comfortable explaining themselves how their products help food service personnel do their jobs better. That's another thing that food service directors it's very important to them. These food service people spend an amazing amount of effort. And over the last year and a half, these people have been heroes in Texas. I'm guessing they've been the same in where y'all are at. They've kept the food coming. They've gone out to the sidewalks and put the food in boxes, and it's just been amazing what they've done. And so one of the things we might suggest to you here in this activity, if your producer audience lends itself, you might break into different sectors and figure out how each sector might really kind of create its own plan. When I say sector, I'm talking about fresh produce, proteins, processed goods, the different types of food products that are being sold, and have each group really come up with why they feel like they are really going to help the food service director, why it's important for the food service directors to buy their food, and why it's going to help the actual people on the front line. And so just like Lacey did in module 1, and you'll see it in module 3 and 4 tomorrow, the conclusion and the next steps, here's where you'll see the link here to our materials that can take you to the case studies. Here's some example case studies. There's one in Vermont, so that would perfectly work for this group. That's, you know, the group in Vermont that's going to do the training. The other ones are probably not going to work. I don't think Michigan is in the Northeast, but again, this is where you regionalize. I would encourage y'all to be thinking about how do we create case studies for food hubs that you might want to highlight between now and then. We're certainly going to do that here in Texas. And this is the kind of the live or die place where you've taken your producers through this whole module 2 training, and here's where you really are going to say, all right, are we ready to go to module 3? And so here's where you want each of the producers in your training session to be able to check that box and say, yes, I understand the market channel options. I know the basics of working with intermediated and wholesale distributors. I know how to find and respond. If someone in your training cannot check that, then you're going to have to maybe take a step back and say, okay, what's holding you up? What do you not feel comfortable with? Why do you feel like you don't understand that? This is really what a producer has to know in order to, what we think, answer the next questions that are going to be addressed in module 3 and module 4. I understand how schools expect to receive local products. Understand school purchasing practices, quality standards, vendor requirements. There should be no doubts in their mind after you've done the training as to how to answer those questions as it relates to each of their individual operations. Next slide, please, Tim. And this is just a reminder for us again to regionalize all of these different pictures and suggestions and just suggestions. For example, Lacey did a good job of showing you the USDA statistics, the link to that and how to go about regionalizing those, even down to zip codes, for example. That's how you really bring the data to impress upon the producers who are at your training. I picked these slides here because they represent Texas. This picture on the left is a Chile harvest out in West Texas. The picture on the top right is, of course, citrus, which is one of our signature items in Texas. Those 3 people there are people who have been involved in the citrus industry for many years. So if I was going to use citrus as an example in a lot of my scenarios, this is a picture I would ask people to look at and say, you know, these are the people that are important to us. This bottom row, this bottom picture here is a pasture poultry operation in Central Texas, right outside of Austin, that we've been working with out of our NCAT office in San Antonio to get into farm to school. So these are where you make this your own. You know, here's where an opportunity where you bring up website of school districts that are local to your training that may have a solicitation on their webpage. And so that it would be ideal if you had someone who would, from that school district, who could be there and go over the solicitation and answer questions from producers. We did our specs this way because, why did you spec oranges at 113? Well, we spec oranges at 113 so we don't have to cut them in half when we serve them. That's why. Make sure you include state level requirements. And I'll give you one, you know, a real odd one here in Texas, just so you'll know that it's important to think about. Here in Texas, no individual, no business owner can sell to schools if you owe back child support payments. And you have to fill out that form in order to be a registered vendor for any school, any university, anywhere that uses public dollars to purchase food. You have to fill out that form that says, I don't owe back child support. There may be some other weird ones in the states y'all are at. And so there's also an opportunity to indicate local programs that could help producers do this. Here in Texas, the Department of Ag is the farm to school conduit. They have a local product promotion program called Go Texan, which they spend a lot of energy helping producers sell their products. And they also have 3 staff people who are dedicated to farm to school that run a program called Farm Fresh Texas. And so the idea is at all of our trainings here in Texas, we're going to have at least one of those people at the training to talk about how the Department of Ag can help all the producers involved do what they need to do. So that's my presentation. I don't know if there's any questions. I don't know if there's anything in the chat. Tammy, you put in there, we'll having Food Connects here on Thursday as part of the panel. Who is that, Tammy?
That's the folks that were featured in that video in module 2 that we just showed. So we'll be kind of tying that, connecting that their panel to the case study that we did with them.
Okay, well, thank you. That's module 2. How do you get your stuff to the schools, and how do you learn how to talk to the food service people?
So as we wrap up for the day, just wanted to take a moment to get to hear from all of you and get a sense of how you all are thinking of making it local. So I'm going to go down a list from all the state groups, and hopefully someone from your group is willing to share just a program, event, or policy or producer story that should be uplifted within your state training team. So let's start with the main group. Is there anyone from the main group who'd like to share any updates?
We talked about having tiered offerings, like a broader selling to schools 101 type of offering, and then having much more smaller, targeted, deeper dives with groups, and just kind of discussed the challenges of the virtual format a bit, because we do have an agricultural state trade show where that would be like the perfect opportunity to convene producers in person, but COVID might be a barrier to that. So more, but we'll hear from other states too.
Great. Thank you. All right, next, Massachusetts.
I don't think we have any blazing examples, but I will be able to come up with some short order.
Great, no problem. Thank you. The Montana Virgin Islands Vermont group. Anyone from those respective areas want to share?
Sure, I guess we were just talking about whether for our trainings we'd have enterprises, and then also to make sure to reach out to our state legislators.
Thank you. All right, moving on, New Hampshire group.
Hi, we had some more people on today than yesterday, so we kind of went back to the slide 4, and we're going back to still personalize it and what would be the motivation for getting the producers to come, and how would we motivate them? Would it be that we would focus on food hubs or direct to school, and kind of a discussion on that? And it sounds like it'll be both, because we have farms for both, but we'll make sure that food hubs and direct to consumer is still a part of it. But we did a lot of brainstorming still.
Great, thank you. New York.
I can share. So we talked about specific people, farmers and distributors we'd want to invite, and discussed potential formats, virtual, in person, how to split it up and make it convenient for everyone.
Great, thank you. And lastly, Rhode Island.
So we mostly
talked about more about building our team because there's a lot of resources in such a small state. But for highlights, it was mostly just around, there's a few farms around that have been consistently great at farm to school, as well as food service management companies that have been really great recently with farm to school. And so mostly just highlighting them and how they've managed to get through the system of many food service management companies to be successful.
Thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like there's been some productivity in these last few groups. So really hoping to just, jump on that momentum as move on with the rest of the day. Tomorrow's going to put us our halfway point. So hopefully with a few other breakout sessions, you'll be able to really come to a nice form in planning for the local producer training. So we'll be continuing to build on that sort of momentum through modules, the continued module learning, as well as the deep dives into modules 3 and 4. You'll also have plenty more time to break out with your state team. So just know that that's on the agenda for the next couple of days. That about does it for today. So thanks again for joining us for day 2. We'll see you all tomorrow.